Please be seated for the prayer. May we, the councillors of Ku-ring-gai, always be aware that decisions we make affect the daily lives of those we represent. May we make these decisions with knowledge and goodwill, respecting the views of others, and may we show ourselves worthy to follow in the footsteps of those who have protected the special qualities of Ku-ring-gai for over 100 years. Amen. On behalf of Council, I recognise the traditional custodians of the land, the Ku-ring-gai people on whose land we meet. I would now like to outline a few points regarding this evening's proceedings. Tonight's meeting will be live streamed on the Council website at www.kmc.nsw.gov.au/livestream. Only councillors and council staff will be shown on camera. The webcast of the meeting will remain on the website until the minutes of the meeting are formally adopted by Council. The webcast commences once the Mayor is seated and will cease if Council goes into a confidential session where the public and the press are excluded pursuant to Section 10A of the Local Government Act. Council meetings remain open to the public as observers, but in line with the Code of Meeting Practice, speakers will now address the Council through the monthly public forums and not at Council meetings. For more information about addressing Council, please visit our website at www.kmc.nsw.gov.au. All present tonight must refrain from engaging in disorderly conduct, publicly alleging breaches of the Council's Code of Conduct, or making other potentially defamatory statements. There is to be no filming or photographs taken by members of the public during the Council meeting. Councillors and Council staff must declare and manage any conflicts of interest they may have in relation to any item of business that is the subject of the meeting agenda this evening. Are there any apologies this evening? Councillor Spencer?
Sorry, I was just wondering if you have received the apology from Councillor Kelly.
Yes, we have. Would you like to move that
Yes,
apology?
I would. Thank you.
So you're moving that the apology be accepted for Councillor Kelly and
Correct.
leave of absence be granted. Moved by Councillor Spencer, seconded by Councillor Pettit. All those in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you. General Manager, are there any staff apologies?
Madam Mayor and Councillors, Director Banasif is away, he's unwell, and he's being represented here tonight by Mr Drago.
Thank you. Councillors, are there any declarations of interest this evening? None. General Manager, are there any staff declarations?
There are none from the staff, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. General Manager, would you please list documents circulated to councillors?
Madam Mayor and Councillors, there are three. A memo from the Manager Governance and Corporate Strategy dated 11 February, which contained additional business papers for GB items 13 and 14 respectively. The dark greens, which contain a late item GB 17, invitation to the street work long late lunch, and the light greens, which contain a minor amendment to MM1, mayoral minute help for bushfire affected regions from Ku-ring-gai. Thank
you. Councillors, I seek confirmation. General Manager, would you please list the reports that we have to be considered in closed meeting?
Madam Mayor and Councillors, no reports, but there are attachments in relation to GB 14, and they are attachments A1, A2 and A3.
Thank you. Councillors, is there a motion with regard to those materials remaining in confidential? Moved Councillor Pettit, seconded Councillor Chateau. All those in favour? That is unanimous. We move to confirmation of the minutes of the ordinary meeting of council held on the 10th of December 2019, and I seek a motion for confirmation of those minutes. Moved Councillor Greenfield, seconded Councillor Clark. All those in favour? That is unanimous. There are two mayoral minutes here, and I will read this because there's two minor changes that have been necessary. And you will see from the memo that was issued as of today's date that the Bark Run will now be held on the 23rd of February 2020 instead of the 9th of February as referred to in the minute because of the wet weather requiring that change of date. And additionally, the disposal of the green waste vegetation will be free of charge at the Suez Waste Facility at Belrose instead of the Kimbrickie Waste Facility at Terry Hills as printed in the mayoral minute. Apart from those two changes, the mayoral minute is as printed. And so I would move that minute in that format and seek any comment from councillors. If there's, there is Councillor Shatto.
Yes, Madam Mayor, this is regarding the help for bushfire affected regions from Ku-ring-gai or mayoral minute. And I'm just looking at the recommendation for $7,500 to be donated. Like others, I do wonder about where this money that everybody donates is actually going to be allocated. And so, because I think people need to be accountable, residents need to be accountable, we all need to be accountable for where we spend the money. Is there, are these wires and the Ku-ring-gai RSS Brigade and Bendigo Bank, are they going to provide a list of beneficiaries? Do you know?
Perhaps Director Bevan will be able to answer that.
Madam Mayor and councillors, we don't ask for any sort of reconciliation for donations. We do it in our structured programs because people are applying for certain things. We need to know that they do it. But with donations, we don't require an account of what they've done with the money, and it's a small amount, so it's not as if it's a large amount of money.
Thank you.
Thank you. If there's no further comments or questions, I will put that minute. All those in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you. We move to MM2, and that's the 2020 Australia Day Honours and Citizen of the Year Awards. And I'd like to read this in full to give the recognition that is well deserved by the recipients. I'm pleased to inform you that 8 Ku-ring-gai citizens, through their outstanding achievements and services to the community, have been awarded 2020 Australia Day Honours. We are very proud to have these dedicated and talented Australians as members of the Ku-ring-gai community. I would like to read to you the names of the special Ku-ring-gai citizens and, on behalf of Council, congratulate them on their excellent contributions to Australian society. Dr. Zenaida Sycat Edwards, OAM of Linfield, for service to the community and to heritage preservation. Rabbi Zalman Castell of AM of St Ives for significant service to interfaith and intercultural understanding and acceptance. Mr. Murray Stewart Lennon, OAM of North Wahroonga, for service to the community of St Ives. Emeritus Professor Sharman Ellen Pretty, AM of Wahroonga, for significant service to music education and to the performing arts. The Honourable Barry Robert O'Farrell, AO of Turramurra, for distinguished service to the people and Parliament of New South Wales, particularly as Premier, and to the community. Professor Robert John Symes, AO of East Linfield, for distinguished service to education and to medicine in the field of cancer research and clinical trials. Mr Michael James Scott, AM of West Pymble, for significant service to urban development and to the community. Mr Indirajit Indi Singh of OAM of Pymble for service to the international community through eye care programs. I also congratulate Ku-ring-gai Citizen of the Year winners for 2020. Citizen of the Year, Lucy Dahill. Young Citizen of the Year, Catherine Bowditch. Senior Citizen of the Year, Noella and Malcolm Allarding. Outstanding service to the community group individual, Lifeline Harbour to Hawkesbury Financial Counselling Team. On behalf of Council, I congratulate these award winners on their outstanding achievements. Ku-ring-gai should be proud that it has citizens being recognised at the highest level for their selfless dedication, commitment and contribution to local, national and international communities. I move that Council acknowledge the outstanding contribution made by these recipients of 2020 Australia Day honours to the Ku-ring-gai community and to the wellbeing of our society, and B, that the Mayor write to the recipients on behalf of Council to congratulate them on receiving their award, including a copy of this mayoral minute. And I open the floor if any councillors wish to make any comments. If not, I just might add a few personal ones of my own. I think Dr Zenny Edwards is well known to many of the councillors who have been on the council for any length of time. She has made an amazing contribution to the local heritage of the area. Also, Mr Murray Lennon has been a wonderful citizen, particularly through his service to fire protection in our area. And of course also the Honourable Barry O'Farrell, who was formerly the member for Ku-ring-gai and who was always a pleasure to work with on council and community issues, and I think worked very effectively on many local issues with our staff as well. So I certainly personally know those recipients of the honours and congratulate them. If there are no further comments, I'll put that minute. All those in favour? That is carried. Thank you. We move to petitions. Are there any petitions this evening? Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I believe this matter has likely already been dealt with, but being the first council meeting back, I feel tabled the petition, given that the residents did go through the time to deal with it. It's in regards to a pedestrian refuge island in Robin Avenue in Turramurra, and it has 26 signatures. So I'd like it referred to the appropriate officer. And
sorry, could I get the thrust of the...
The thrust of it, they're respectfully requesting council delay installation so that the Traffic and Transport Department can view the proposed crossing site during Turramurra High School's first term.
Thank you, and I do believe that has been significantly addressed by officers from the council in the interim, but quite appropriate that you table it as the first meeting back tonight. So you are moving that that petition be received and referred to the appropriate officer.
Yes, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. So that's moved. Councillor Clark, seconded Councillor Pettit. All those in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you. Just hand that to the officer. No further petitions, I believe, so we will move on to general business. I invite councillors to nominate any item on the agenda that they wish to have a site inspection. None. I invite councillors to nominate any items on the agenda that you wish to adopt in accordance with the officer's recommendation, allowing for minor changes without debate. Councillor Nye.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. GB1, 2019 to 20 Budget Review, second quarter ended December 2019, officer's recommendation.
Seconded by Councillor Pettit. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
GB2, Investment Report as at 30 November 2019, the officer's recommendation.
Seconded Councillor Clark. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
GB3, Investment Report as at 31st of December 2019, the officer's recommendation.
Seconded by Councillor Greenfield. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
GB4, Investment Report as at 31st of January 2020, the officer's recommendation.
Seconded Councillor Greenfield. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
GB5, Analysis of Land and Environment Court Costs, second quarter 2019 to 2020.
Seconded by Councillor Shadow. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
GB6, Public Interest Disclosures Policy, the officer's recommendation.
Seconded by Councillor Smith. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
GB7, Business Approved under Authority Delegated to the Mayor, Deputy Mayor and General Manager for the December to January recess period 2019 to 2020, the officer's recommendation.
Councillor Shadow is seconding that. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
Now, with GB 8 and 9, I've got an additional point for each. I think it should be able to be brought up onto the screen. Basically, I'll read out GB8, Transforming Australia 2020 Summit. So A and B are the same, that any councillors wishing to attend the Transforming Australia Summit 2020 notify the General Manager by 31st of March 2020. B, that a substitute delegate or delegates be nominated by 2nd of October 2020, where councillors wishing to attend the summit are not re-elected in the September 2020 local government elections. And this is the additional point. C, that as per the councillor expenses and facilities policy, any councillor who does attend this conference in Noosa will provide a written report to council on the aspects of the conference relevant to council, business and or the community. So I'm moving this as it is because it's consistent.
Is there a seconder? Seconded Councillor Chateau. Do you wish to speak to that, Councillor
No.
Nye? Oh, sorry, that's right. We're moving it without debate. Okay, we'll put that motion then, if everyone's happy with that and that form. All those in favour? That is Councillors Nye, Clark, Spencer, Greenfield, Chateau, Smith, Kay, Anderson against, Pettit. That is carried. Councillor Nye.
All right. GB9, 2020 National General Assembly of Local Government Core Formations. So points A and B are as per the officer's recommendation, and we've added point C here, that as per the councillor expenses and facilities policy, any councillor who does attend this conference in Canberra will provide a written report to council on the aspects of the conference relevant to council business and or the community.
Seconded by Councillor Chateau. All those in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you.
GB10, Minutes of Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee meeting held on 26th of September 2019, the officer's recommendation.
Seconded by Councillor Greenfield. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
GB11, Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee, extension of appointment of the external independent member, the officer's recommendation.
Seconded by Councillor Greenfield. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
GB12, Urban Forest Policy, the officer's recommendation.
Seconded by Councillor Greenfield. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
GB13, Progress Status Report, February 2020, the officer's recommendation.
Seconded by Councillor Chateau. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
GB14, Tender RFT 11-2019, Linfield Village Green Head Contractor, the officer's recommendation.
Seconded by Councillor Chateau. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
And then GB17, Invitation to the Streetwork Long Late Lunch, the officer's recommendation.
Seconded by Councillor Greenfield. All those in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you. That takes us straight to Oh, sorry, Councillor Pettit.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd just like to move NM1 as printed.
NM1 as...
Withdrawn.
That is withdrawn by Councillor Clark. Thank you. I believe, Councillor Clark, you're trying to turn that off, are you? No? Oh, on. Okay. That takes us to GB 15, Site-Specific Development Control Plan to support planning proposal for 45 to 47 Tennyson Avenue and 105 Eastern Road, Turramurra. Is there a motion? Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to move the staff's motion as printed.
The officer's recommendation, thank you, is moved, and that is seconded by Councillor Spencer. Do you have your light on? Amendment. Okay, is there a seconder for this recommendation as moved? Councillor Shatto. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, I don't believe there is going to be much need to discuss this. We've talked ad nauseum about this particular planning proposal at previous council meetings. This is site-specific DCP amendments. It was also addressed in the pre-councillor meeting, is from my understanding. Therefore, I'm quite comfortable moving the officer's recommendation and commit the motion to the floor.
Councillor Shatto, as seconder at this stage, do you wish to speak?
Simply just to note that this is for the purpose of public exhibition, so I think we should move on with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Spencer, an amendment?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have an amendment, if I may approach the staff.
We'll just wait to get that amendment up on the screen. Councillor Spencer, I've just discussed this with staff, and that is a direct negation which we can't deal with as an amendment. It would have to be a foreshadowed motion. So we won't be dealing with that in the way that you intended. It would have to be foreshadowed.
Right. So could you explain the procedure, please? What do we do next?
General Manager.
Madam Mayor and Councillors, so what we would have to do is just vote on, or debate and vote on the motion, and if the motion is lost, then this would be brought to the table as a subsequent motion. But because it's direct opposite of the motion, we have to wait until the motion that's on the table is either won or lost and taken off the table.
If I may, I believe I do understand the General Manager. So because the original motion has been moved and so on, so may I then suggest that we just carry on and vote for the original motion and then put this back and then vote on this. Is that correct? Thank you.
If the original motion fails.
Yes, correct. Thank you.
That's what we'll be doing. So, Councillor Clark has spoken, Councillor Shatto has spoken. Are there any other speakers on the original motion? No. If not, I will ask the mover, Councillor Clark, to sum up, please.
Oh, thank you, Madam Mayor. A stimulating debate. I'm glad other councillors seem to agree that this motion, in fact, is just moving forward what we have previously debated for hours. There's nothing particularly new here, and thus I encourage the motion as printed to be adopted. So, thank you.
We will vote on that now, so I'm putting the original motion, which is the officer's recommendation as printed, moved by Councillor Clark. All those in favour? That is Councillors Clark, Greenfield, Chatto, Smith, Anderson. Against, Councillors Nye, Pettit, Spencer, Kay. That is carried. We move on to GB 16. That is New South Wales Department of Education Joint Use Proposal, St Ives High School Indoor Sports Centre. Is there a motion, please? Councillor Kay.
Oh, I have an amendment, sorry.
We can only deal with a motion at this point, not an amendment. Are you wanting to put a whole new motion? Well, then it's
No, an amendment, really.
you can move a whole motion at this point if the wording is different in parts to what is printed. Is that what you're...
Put that up on the screen.
Are you wanting to move a motion in that way? All right.
It's the same results, is it not?
Well, it's...
Oh, sorry. It's the same result, is it not?
Well, no, it's quite different if you move something as an amendment after a motion is put.
Yeah.
But if you want to move a motion first, we'll be debating
I
that.
want the opportunity to go first.
All right. Please detail the motion.
I have it on a USB stick.
Okay. Would you like to give it to the staff? Councillors, we'll just wait while that comes up on the screen.
Sorry, Madam Mayor, may I ask a question, please?
Yes, Councillor
So,
Spencer.
What are we doing currently? Is it the motion that...
Yes,
you.
Councillor
Voting on this.
A has got
Thank
the
you.
motion on a USB and the staff are just loading that. Is that as you intended, Councillor Kay? Would you like to stand and read that out for us? Thank you.
Oh, you want me to read it? Okay.
That would be helpful, I think, for people in the back particularly.
Let me find it. I do have a copy of it. Okay. So, that in place of the recommendation suggested in the report to Council, that the following resolutions of Council be voted on seriatim. So, I'd probably prefer if you could clarify to the rest of the councillors what that actually means.
Well, just read the
Please
whole
want me to
motion
read-
first.
Yeah,
That
that's
would be
fine.
good.
That the General Manager is authorised to forthwith sign the current version sent on the 3rd of February 2020 to Council of the Heads of Agreement with the Department of Education for the St Ives High School forecourt basketball project, and that the executed agreement to be sent immediately to the Department of Education by way of an exchange of contracts. That Council and Department of Education proceed to draft and finalise immediately with Department of Education the project deed and licence agreement for the project referred to in the Heads of Agreement on terms not inconsistent with the Heads of Agreement. That Council will not proceed by way of DA process and instead accepts the advices of EPM projects dated 16th of October 2019 and the 11th of February 2020 to adopt the expedited statutory approvals path for all stage 2 of the project by utilising the ESEP, CDC and REF provisions with regards to stage 2 statutory approvals for the project. That Council accepts the invoice for stage 2 of the project being phase 2 functional design brief and phase 4 systematic design and statutory approvals sent to it by the Department of Education on the 22nd of January 2020. That Council will do all things necessary to immediately commence the process of applying for statutory approvals and consider the engagement of whatever professional services will best enable it to obtain the consents as soon as possible. That Council is, so far as it may be necessary in accordance with section 55 3(1) of the Local Government Act 1993 determine the use of the consultants and construction contractors who have been directly or indirectly engaged by Department of Education pursuant to processes for stage 1 of the project constitutes insinuating circumstances that should result in cost benefits for council in designing, seeking statutory approval, documenting and constructing stage 2 of the project for a further 2 courts, car park and cafe at the same site and to the same standards and specifications. That council resolved to make a final commitment to construct stage 2 of the project and to fund Department of Education to manage the design and construction of stage 2 of the project as provided for under the heads of agreement at the construction cost previously advised by council by Department of Education. That council enter into all necessary documentation and loan agreements to finance stage 2 of the project with the institution that has given a loan approval referred to in the report to council. That at each council meeting until the finalisation of the above, a report be given in writing and orally as to the current status of the project, including but not limited to the implementation of the preceding resolutions. That council forthwith to all things necessary to implement the above resolutions, including but not limited to communicating to schools infrastructure, New South Wales, the above resolutions.
Thank you. I'll just ask for a seconder on that, seconded by Councillor Spencer. Now, I'll just go back, Councillor Kay, you asked about the process in reference to inseriatum. So just to explain to all councillors, as you can see from what was read up and is on the screen, this motion has 10 parts to it. Inseriatum would require council to vote individually on each of those parts. Is that your intention, Councillor Kay?
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you. Councillor Kay, do you wish to speak to this motion now?
Yeah,
Thank you.
Correct.
Thank you.
Now, we would have all, the councillors would have received an email that had come from one of our state members that created a summary, which was an executive summary. Now, I agree with this particular summary, so I wanted to go through, and this makes part of my presentation. Okay. So we've got moving the project forward to construction. We're looking at moving the project forward to construction stage. We're looking at if the recommended resolutions are passed, then our council will not be supporting local basketball. We will not have an indoor basketball facility in our area anytime in the near future, or council will probably forfeit its $3.5 million state government grant because it will breach prior commitments in the funding agreement to move this project along. Council has also obtained a loan and has the financial capacity to go ahead with the project. The EPM, the state's foremost expert in the use of ESEPs, has given written advice disagreeing with the report to council and concluded that an expedited approval process is available on this project, which involves community consultation. The school retained by EPM includes Knox for its Performing Arts Centre and the Barkers College.
Sorry, I must ask you to pause. Sorry, this is an open public meeting. We're not allowed to close the back door. Thank you. Understand. It's just... Understand, and I think the gentleman is just going to ask the cleaners to move off, but we just can't have the door closed. Hopefully we'll have it. Thank you very much. Appreciate the assistance on that. No problem. Please resume, Councillor Kay.
Just going back to the previous point. So the schools retained by EPM include Knox Grammar for its Performing Arts Centre and the Barkers College five-court basketball courts currently under construction. On the 18th of February 2020, council meeting involved council backing away from the project in a manner that was inconsistent with the council resolutions in February and December. Below in detail, there is the report to council's criticism of heads of agreement, proposed that the documents be signed and returned to the Department of Education immediately with whatever amendment to clause 6.7, but I appreciate we'd have to go into private to go through the heads of agreement if that's
confidential.
Confidential.
Mm-hmm.
The report to council in December 2019 noted many cost savings to council by proceeding with the heads of agreement whereby the Department of Education managed the construction of council's 2 courts, cafe and car park component of the project. The Department of Local Government has stated in writing that they have no objections to council proceeding with the project. The recommended resolutions will potentially place the council in $5.5 million worse position than if it were committed to the construction of the project if we took the ESEP option. Council should resolve on the 18th of February to proceed with the construction of the project. Now, just how much time? I've got 2 minutes. Okay, so since 2016, multiple reports have been submitted to Ku-ring-gai Council about the need for an indoor sports facility in our LGA. Previous reports have noted the current demand in our area being around 12 indoor courts. Council has obtained a loan and has the financial capacity to go ahead with the project. The Department of Local Government has stated in writing that they have no objections to Council proceeding with the project. EPM are the leading experts in the state regarding alternative pathways. With ESEP, no one has more experience. A list was supplied to councillors, including Knox Grammar, Barker, Ravenswood, and there were numerous others. Development approvals that avoid a DA will avoid unnecessary time and cost. If stage 2 was undertaken by the same contractor as for part 1, it will cause less disruption also to the school. Council risks losing the $3.5 million grant as the milestones of the funding agreement which have not been met. The number of 4 courts is critical because it is a minimum that is financially viable for basketball competitions. There is a substantial cost saving, but by splitting the cost of the building, stages 1 and 2 to council will create a much higher future cost for the ratepayer and the loss of the New South Wales Government grant. The proposed recommendation is illogical. The heads of agreement must be finalised before the funding deed and lease. Okay, that's it at this point.
Thank you. The seconder was Councillor Spencer. Do you wish to speak at this point?
Oh, thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Madam Mayor. If it pleases the Chair, Councillor Kay has my speech, and if she could read that out for me, please. Thank you.
Sorry, Madam Mayor, can a councillor donate their time to another councillor?
Yes, I'm just checking that with the General Manager. The General Manager says this is a first. This hasn't happened before. But if Councillor Kay has a speech that Councillor Spencer acknowledges is his speech, and it is then taken as Councillor Kay just reading Councillor Spencer's speech, so it's his speech and his time to
Yes.
be acknowledged as you speaking.
Much obliged. Thank you.
All right.
Sorry, Madam Mayor, I think there's some questions in regards to procedurally how that actually makes sense. I'm highly concerned about the precedent, firstly, that would be setting. In what scenario can a councillor donate their time? Secondly, in terms of, for example, 2 for, 2 against, does this count as Councillor Kay's initial speech? Does this count as Councillor Spencer's speech?
Yes, that's what the General Manager...
It's actually quite complicated.
And I was just reiterating that it counts as Councillor Spencer's speech, even if Councillor Kay reads it, because Councillor Spencer is agreeing that it is his speech. General Manager, do you have any other further concerns?
Madam Mayor and Councillors, the only precedent I can think of is where members of the public have actually done that in the past. So a member of the public has actually said this is someone else's speech, and we've allowed them to actually go to the lectern and say it. So I can't find any prohibition for it.
The General Manager states that he is unaware of any specific prohibition of that taking place in any form. Councillor Shadow, a question?
Madam Mayor, a question through you to Councillor Spencer. I was just wondering what the problem is. Why you're not able to read the speech. Do you have a problem with speaking? I'm sorry, I don't wish to be intrusive. I just found it quite intriguing.
Councillor Spencer, do you wish to answer Councillor Shadow's question?
Yes, really. It's what's her problem for allowing Councillor Kay to speak on my behalf?
Excuse me, Madam Mayor. Point of order.
Yes, point of
Actually,
order.
I take exception to that rather rude response.
I think, Councillor Spencer, it's fair to say that Councillor Chateau has asked a reasonable question, bearing in mind councillors usually speak for themselves in debate. You are not obliged to answer, however. All right. Councillor Clark, you're not speaking on this aspect right at this moment. Your light's on, but
It's on. It's on for
something else. So, bearing in mind the advice from the staff on this, it is permitted for Councillor Kay to read Councillor Spencer's speech as seconder.
Actually, because Councillor Spencer has seconded my motion and he obviously has the right to reserve his right, can I read his speech out after other people have spoken and get back to me?
If Councillor Spencer says he wishes to reserve his right and instructs you not to speak at this point in time. Councillor Spencer.
Happy to.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Spencer is reserving his right. So we move to the next speaker, which is Councillor Clark.
Oh, thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, I'd like to move an alternate motion, the alternate motion being the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Clark is moving the alternate motion, the officer's recommendation, which of course would be an amendment. Councillor Chateau is seconding that. Therefore, as we have a valid amendment on the floor, we have to debate that now, and no debate is permitted on the motion that Councillor Kay has moved until the debate is concluded and voted upon on the amendment. So, councillors will know those are new meeting procedures as of last year. So, Councillor Clark, we are dealing with your amendment and you may speak to that.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, once again, as with the previous general business item I spoke upon, I will not be speaking particularly long upon general business 16. I believe the matter is fully fleshed out within the report. I believe that the staff's recommendation is a smart and safe way going forward. The project is still moving forward in a manner that protects the ratepayers of Ku-ring-gai. So I commit the motion to the floor. I believe that other councillors may have questions and I may myself later down the track as debate develops. However, at this time I'm quite comfortable with the officer's recommendation and thus put it to the floor.
Councillor Chateau, as seconder of the amendment, do you wish to speak at this point?
My right at this stage. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. That being the case, the floor is open for debate on this matter. Or questions. Councillor Nye.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would like to speak against this amendment, and here are my reasons. I'm very supportive of basketball in Ku-ring-gai. In fact, about 2 years ago when we were talking about the challenges that we face here in Ku-ring-gai and the recognised sporting need of this area, we recognised not just that we're struggling for money in some sense, that our finances aren't entirely perfect, but we also identified a number of projects which we believed would bring benefit to the community. We talked about Marion Street Theatre, we talked about the St. Ives basketball, where we would potentially contribute 2 out of 4 basketball courts. We also talked about the Eastern Field Community Hall, where we've got an aged structure that is sort of reaching towards the end of its potentially useful life unless you stick a band-aid on it and extend its life for a little bit. And now with that Eastern Field Community Hall, if we had gone through with what was proposed at the time of spending an extra $3 or $4 million over what was required to bring it up to building standard, then we would have potentially had 2 indoor courts which could have been used for basketball. So for an extra $3 or $4 million, we as residents of Ku-ring-gai would have had an extra 2 basketballs, which could have been used for the needs of this growing sport in this area, and it would have been beneficial for our residents. Fast forward a year to a year ago. So a year ago, the councillors here, including Councillor Kelly, we all talked about what we should do with this Easternfield Community Hall. Should we spend an extra $3 or $4 million to create a space that would significantly contribute to our community facility strategy and potentially give us space for 2 additional multi-purpose courts which could support basketball indoors? And the vast majority of councillors voted that down. In other words, we said, look, we don't have $3 or $4 million to spend to build 2 basketball courts in Ku-ring-gai. So, okay, fine, that was the council's resolution. But now fast forward to today, now, present day, where we're saying, look, instead of $3 or $4 million of additional incremental costs, we want to spend $13 million. You know, that's 3 or 4 times the amount of money for what, 2 basketball courts. Now, what's the difference? Like, surely that $13 million brings something extra. So we'll look at it. It brings the construction of additional parking spots that are excavated underground. That's a huge contributor of the cost, etc. But also it gives us restrictions, right? Like at the moment on paper, a 20-year lease after which we have no control of the site. It also means that during school hours, we don't have control of the site. At least with the other proposal, we had the opportunity to have control of the site for the full duration for all of time.
I think, Councillor Nye,
going back
you
on
must
point,
stick to the motion on the item that we're
Yeah,
debating tonight.
So why am I against lodging a DA for stage 2 of the St. Ives High School Indoor Sports Centre? Well, although I support basketball and although I would have loved to see this happen, as someone who's responsible for Ku-ring-gai's finances, along with all of the councillors here, I can't justify to any resident why we chose to spend $13 million to build 2 extra basketball courts that we only have control of over 20 years, whereas we didn't want to spend $3 or $4 million to build something similar elsewhere in Ku-ring-gai, which we have control of for a much longer period of time. If we were willing to do the other one, then I would have gladly supported this as well. But as a custodian of Ku-ring-gai's finances, I can't vote if we've rejected the common sense, from my perspective, notion of $3 or $4 million for 2 basketball courts. I cannot in any way support $13 million for 2 basketball courts elsewhere in Ku-ring-gai. I don't care whose ward or whose electorate it's in. I just can't support something that's not common sense. I do want to see basketball facilities built for the residents of Ku-ring-gai, but we have to do it in a financially responsible manner. And that is why I am against this amendment. That is why I'm against lodging at this point in time the DA for stage 2. Thank you.
Councillor Kay, you have your light on next.
Okay, so I'd like to speak against the amendment too. Okay, which points I had raised earlier, but we'll go through a few. To find a way to move this project forward to construction of stage 2, the risk is much higher with future costs for ratepayers and the loss of the New South Wales Government grant of $3.5 million if we take the DA option. The proposed recommendation A is illogical because a DA should be applied by the same firm that may be required to build stage 2 and the most recent architects to work on the project, namely the current, not former architects. Council has no price for how much the original architects would charge to do the same work at the phase 2 and phase 4 quoted by the current architects. Therefore, the proposed recommendation A is to commit council to an unknown quantum of expense for no logical reason. As noted in the report to council, it does not even have the consent of the Department of Education to use the old architects as opposed to the new architects. That refers to GB 16, page 22. As discussed, there is no impediment under the Local Government Act to use the new architects, and they can be authorised under Section 55 of the Local Government Act the same way as the former architects were. The proposed recommendation B should not be followed. Commitment for construction should now be given. Further, the proposed motion here, which is the officer's recommendation, is also illogical. The heads of agreement must be finalised before the funding deed and lease. This resolution suffers the same defect as the previous resolutions of 24th of February and 10th of December 2019, in that it fails to recognise that the heads of agreement has been negotiated and drafted on the basis that it proceeds and not follows the funding deed and lease. If this goes ahead, it's not given at this if this go ahead is not given at this council in relation to the ESET, and we take this path, we all know that it is probably an outdoor sports facility, will never be built in our area at any time in the near future. Thank you.
Councillor Smith.
Madam Mayor, through you to Councillor Kay, I would just like to ask a couple of questions, considering she's one of my fellow ward councillors.
Certainly.
Councillor Kay, under the approvals process recommended by the EPM, do you feel comfortable that you could explain to your community why the development of the 2 basketball courts with associated and integral car parking has been split into 3 different components for approval by way of a DA modification to the existing Department of Education approval, a complying development certificate and a review of environmental factors?
Councillor Cave, do you wish to answer?
I will take that on notice, thank you.
Madam
Thank
Mayor,
you.
just another question to Councillor Kay, if I may. Councillor Kay, do you think Council committing to spend the amount of money this project is likely to cost without going through an open tender passes proverbial, as in a pub test?
Councillor Kay, do you wish to answer that?
I will take that on notice also.
Madam Mayor, through you again to Councillor Kay, are you aware that the proposal from the Department of Education that Council considered in December was party for decision and documentation through statutory approval, and that in the latest draft heads of agreement makes Council responsible for procuring project...
Sorry, councillors, we must be very careful about what we do talk about in open session.
Withdrawn.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, through you to Councillor Kay, having been provided with a copy of Council's traffic assessment for the project, do you think the provisions of the education establishments and childcare facilities SEP can be met in relation to the requirement that that development does not require an alteration of the traffic arrangements?
Councillor
I'll
Kay.
also take that on notice, and I'll also request if we could go through the heads of agreement in the confidential to clarify.
We certainly can move into confidential so that councillors can discuss amongst the group, but not open to the public, the details of the heads of agreement as they currently stand. And I would just explain to those in the gallery that this is because the status of the heads of agreement between the parties involved is required to be confidential. But perhaps, might I suggest, before we move to that phase, that there might be some fleshing out that we can do in open forum here, if the staff are able to answer some questions in a particular way that doesn't require us to go into confidential for the whole of this debate.
Madam Mayor, through you again, just one final question to Councillor Kay. Councillor Kay, after being provided all the information that we're provided with this morning with the recommendations and the experts, later on this afternoon, can you honestly feel comfortable what you have... Sorry, I can't go into what the other amendment is. I'll withdraw that.
I believe that email was confidential.
Yes, all correspondence about the heads of agreement is confidential and
Mayor,
issued to councillors as such.
Madam Mayor, just a final question to Councillor Kay, if I may, through you.
Yes.
Councillor Kay, that document that you are putting forward, have you had any part in writing that?
Councillor Kay.
Again, I will take that on notice. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Shadow, are you wishing to ask some questions at this point?
Well, I was actually wishing, no, not to ask some questions so much, but really to draw us back to what we're really debating tonight and what we're debating about. I've just listened to what Councillor Kay has said and also what Councillor Nye has said, and I just feel as though I'm in another land. If we go back to on page 226 of GB 16, we've got a purpose of the report, the background, comments and the recommendation. Now, on the 18th of February, this is our meeting here today. On the 10th of December at our last meeting, we were advised that Council would not be able to make a decision. We advised the Department of Education that we'd not be able to make a decision to enter into a binding commitment for construction until legal agreements are finalised. Through you, Madam Mayor, to Director Watson, have legal agreements been finalised?
Director Watson.
No.
Thank you. The other point was an independent review of the project has been undertaken. Through you, Madam Mayor, to Director Watson.
Director Watson.
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes it has, and in very broad terms it supports the pathway outlined in the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Point number 3. Advice being obtained from the Office of Local Government in relation to a capital expenditure review for the project. Through you, Madam Mayor, to Director Watson.
Director Watson.
Through you, Madam Mayor, that piece of correspondence is an attachment to this agenda item, so yes, it has been.
Making a submission to the Office of Local Government of an amended borrowing schedule for the 2019-2020 financial year and approval being obtained to borrow the required funds from TCorp or another financial institution. I understand that we are able to borrow, but we haven't finalised a borrowing. Is that correct? Through you, Madam Mayor.
Director Watson.
Through you, Madam Mayor, that's correct, and at such time as Council actually resolves to borrow money, you would then lodge an amended borrowing schedule at that point in time.
Thank you, Director Watson. So the recommendation is that Council proceeds with the design and documentation of a DA but doesn't enter into a binding commitment until the development consent is achieved and legal agreements, including funding deeds and lease, between Council and relevant parties have been finalised. I'm very uncomfortable to put our residents and this Council in jeopardy for the sake of rushing through an ill-advised decision about this joint use proposal. As much as anybody on this Council, with the possible exception of Councillor Nye, I'm fully supportive of a 4-court basketball court, indoor basketball court facility in St Ives School. I think it's a wonderful idea. However, until we dot our I's and cross our T's, until we have our proper legal agreements, our proper heads of agreement, and we look very carefully at what our borrowings might be, which we haven't factored into our long-term financial plan, which are simply which aren't there, until we look at the difficulties that places Council in, I don't believe that we can move forward. And I think this is a responsible and well-reasoned and well-documented piece of a report, and I would fully support it.
Councillor Smith, do you wish to speak at this point or ask questions?
Yes, Madam Mayor. Just in relation, if I could ask a question through you to Director Watson. Director Watson, is there any sort of safe way of moving through this as to allow this to happen, the basketball courts, because it's something that's very important to me to move it forward? Is there any other way we can move this forward without putting the Council at risk or the ratepayers' money at risk?
Director Watson.
Through you, Madam Mayor, what we have done is outlined a pathway that was applied to the Linfield Village Green, it was applied to the Linfield Library site, and it has been applied to the Marion Street Theatre.
it is a process that is consistent with procedures and processes that this council put in place for what it defined were major projects. So I am quite satisfied that the pathway that the staff have mapped out is entirely consistent with what we've done and represents best practice and provides appropriate guarantees and risk mitigations for the council.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Director Watson. Madam Mayor, through to you, Director Watson again. In relation, actually no, sorry, that's going to have to go into confidential. For me, as a councillor at Ku-ring-gai, and representing St Ives, this is a critical component to actually achieve the most that we can for the residents of Ku-ring-gai, not just St Ives. And what that is, it's in regarding getting our funding deed as what's listed on here, funding deed in order, a construction contract, lease, and between council and relevant parties finalised before we actually commit to building. With what Director Watson has explained there and then, I quite honestly don't feel that there's any other way of moving forward on this project without supporting this recommendation.
Councillor Greenfield is next.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you, Madam Mayor, if Council resolved to go ahead with the funding and the loan in the current state, not following the pathway that has been recommended by Director Watson, what are the risks to Council, please?
Director Watson.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'm going to have to dance around this because a large part of the answer I would ordinarily give would be in confidence.
Sorry.
There is a large amount of money at stake here for which Council is effectively being asked to avoid going to public tender. We have a number of documents that in total come to no more than 4 pages, which outline likely costs of the project. Those documents are several months apart and several $1 million apart. The most recent one, being only 2 weeks old, is several millions of dollars higher than figures alluded to by Councillor Nye not that long ago. Not that long ago tonight, Council approved the Linfield Village Green tender. All of you would have been familiar with the amount of time, effort and documentation sitting behind that decision. That project involved a contribution from another state agency of about half of what we're talking about here in council funds. And that deed, lease and heads of agreement took years to negotiate. And that's not being afforded to this project, and I think there is immense risk attached to that.
Thank you. If we borrowed at the current estimates, what projects would be put at risk or put in jeopardy or are just not done at all, please? Through you, Madam Mayor.
That's probably a difficult one to answer, but Director Watson, you like to have a go at that? Director Marshall might like to assist.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's not possible for officers to say which projects would be at jeopardy. It would be a matter of council deciding upon its priorities as to which projects it might not do, or what other expenditure it might wish to reduce in order to fund the repayments of a loan.
Okay. Thank you.
I just might ask for some clarification, Director Watson, on the points raised about a two-court facility. If you could explain why we've not looked at two-court facilities in contrast to larger facilities, minimum 4 courts.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I think the answer to that question is a 4-court facility is what is needed to run viable competitions. and it is the minimum threshold we are advised for a commercial operator to come in and run a facility. Councillors will know from its own business case and modelling for this project that there's not a lot of extra skin in the operating cash surplus to do very much. A 2-core facility would be more challenging than a 4-core facility. The school is building a 2-court facility because their primary focus is on their own student population needs rather than wider community needs. That doesn't mean they won't entertain some community use down the track as they do at the moment for their existing facilities, but it will certainly not allow the opportunities that a 4-court facility facilitates.
It's also been stated that if council decides to follow the DA pathway, that we're not supporting basketball in Ku-ring-gai and that we'll never have a facility for basketball, and that we would lose a $3.5 million grant that we currently have. Would you be able to make comment on those assertions?
There's 2 elements to that question, Madam Mayor. I'll deal with the first one first because it's less sensitive. I think it is completely without foundation that council, following a DA process for its courts, is not supporting basketball. You just cannot make that leap. It's nonsensical. I am less able to speculate about whether or not council would lose its grant. As I outlined in the earlier briefing, there has been some interventions in that process that I have never seen before. So I can't speculate about where we might end up there. I would have to say there is an element of risk attached to that grant now that perhaps didn't exist late last year, based on conversations I'd had with the Office of Sport.
Following on from that, whilst you haven't given us particular figures in open session, understandably, you did allude to the fact that the current potential cost of the project has leapt several $million in the last few weeks. Does council know what this project will cost? And if not, how can anyone state that we have the financial capacity to proceed with it?
Through you, Madam Mayor, bearing in mind we don't have a heads of agreement, all discussions so far, and most of this is on the public record, see council as being fully liable for all of the costs of 2 courts. So what we have now is what's called an indicative cost. Built into that is no allowance for council's own management of that project and any costs council might bear, and there is absolutely no parameters around what variations might flow from a build, but all of that risk sits with council, and it has been suggested that that risk sits with the Department of Education, and that is simply not correct.
Further to that, there's also been comments made that we would be many millions of dollars worse off if we don't proceed with the VSEP pathway. Could you comment on that aspect, please?
Through you, Madam Mayor, the figure that was cited earlier, I'm assuming includes $3.5 million for the loss of the grant. I'm not sure what the rest of that figure to get you in excess of $5 million is made of. What I can say without breaching confidence is that when council went to the market with fully detailed QS report in its back pocket for another project recently, it got a number of competitive bids that were below what council was expecting. There was no reason to honestly suspect that that same competitive market tension won't exist for this project. You don't know what you don't know until you go to the market.
Councillor Kay, you're next.
So through you, Madam Mayor, to Director Watson, we talk about the ESEP versus the DA option. Who actually instigated the ESEP? Was that a suggestion from council staff, or did that come from the Department of Education, or
Director,
if you could just clarify?
Director Watson.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the first time I ever heard a reference to the ESEP was at a meeting where I was on the telephone from Townsville between the Mayor, the General Manager and one of the local members, and that was the first time I had heard made reference to the ESEP. So no, it wasn't a process put forward by council.
Councillor Kay.
Okay, I do recall being, sorry, still Director Watson, I do recall being in a meeting with yourself and Department of Education where the ESEP option was discussed, where it was viable to both parties. Is that correct?
Director Watson.
Through you, Madam Mayor, my recollection is that that meeting was attended by the representative from EPM projects or whatever they are on the 12th of November, so it was after that date. Council didn't commit to that process at that time.
Thank you, Director Watson.
The next speaker is Councillor Spencer.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have a couple of questions through you to Director Watson. Firstly, I have no preference in terms of pathways, and we had a briefing this evening and a number of questions and issues have been raised and addressed. Just for the purpose of this meeting, could I ask Director Watson to give us an idea of the lead time under this mode from now till delivery?
Certainly, Director Watson.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Bearing in mind that for either pathway, a DA or the hybrid version that EPM Projects has put forward, there is at this present time no documentation of any sort for assessment. There is several months in preparation of that documentation. The advice councillors were given today, and this isn't out of confidence, is depending on whether you are talking about the REF process or the CDC process, somewhere between 1 and 3 months, as one process requires public notification and the other doesn't. That process also requires the Department of Education to do a modification to its existing development consent in relation to access arrangements. I don't believe either myself or the consultant put a time limit on that, but the DA process itself would run somewhere between 6 and 9 months was the advice given at the briefing today.
Thank you.
Councillor Spencer.
Following on that, and we discussed this as well in the briefing earlier, just for the purpose of this meeting. Now, I understand that it would take approximately 6 to 9 months, let's say, through past experience for a DA, and it is unlikely that we would see that DA or whichever pathway we choose during the term of this council. I believe that is correct, isn't it?
Question to Director Watson.
Through you, Madam Mayor, if you add on design and documentation to a CDC and REF process and modification of a DA which is not council's, it's highly unlikely that you will see all the elements of that alternate pathway in this term of council either.
Thank you. Final question.
Certainly.
Now, we discussed as well earlier in the briefing that there were a number of suggestions, mistrust happening, in the remaining period we have in this term. For instance, I did say to Director Watson and Councillor Smith that I know more about this project in the last 3 days than the last 3 years. And through no fault of anyone, some things were not available to the directors for us, and some may be confidential. But my question is whether could the director maybe adopt a more open approach in a way that we would know what's happening.
Point of order, Madam Mayor.
Well, I think it's a question that Councillor Spencer is asking.
I think it's an inference, however, on the character of our directors, saying that our director is not open and transparent.
Well, I think it wasn't taken that way in the briefing that we've had, and maybe it's best to give Director Watson an opportunity to respond to that.
May I just address that question? The inference wasn't suggested by me. It was a true feedback. So it's not something that's targeting anyone.
Thank you.
I believe we clarified that in the briefing this evening.
Yes. Director Watson, do you want to make comment on that?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'm quite happy to give an answer, but given the way things have unfolded here, I'll give a more expansive answer than I gave in the closed session.
Sure.
I didn't take it as a personal affront when Councillor Spencer first asked the question. In fact, I acknowledge that perhaps we should have provided more information to councillors at various points in time. What I would say is that lots of the pieces of information that have become available have only been prepared subsequent to the council meeting on the 10th of December, shortly after which council went into recess. We only, for example, got a version of the heads of agreement in mid-January. We got another one less than 2 weeks later in first week of February. The independent review by external consultants was only received again in the first week of February. So many of these things and other documents which I won't allude to, but traffic reports and all the rest of it, as the Mayor said, simply weren't available. Timing wasn't great, and as I said earlier today, the purpose of today's meeting isn't in fact to go into the detail of the heads of agreement, because at the present time it is the staff's firm view that there isn't a heads of agreement that is satisfactory to put before council. So quite happy to give councillors more information, but this debate has gone into matters that simply weren't identified or foreshadowed by the report to council.
Thank you. The next speaker is Councillor Nye.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've got a question through you to the relevant director. On page 229, it says that the heads of agreement in the current form, in this public document, has a term of lease of 20 years. So I was wondering if from a ratepayer's perspective and a public benefit and ratepayer's interest perspective, would it be more beneficial for the ratepayer from utilisation, from financial and depreciation perspective, if council was able to have a lease more than 20 years? So, for example, 25-year lease or 50 years, would the ratepayer's interest be served better if it was a longer lease?
Yes, and obviously, councillors, there is material that pertains to the heads of agreement that is publicly available in the business papers. So it is possible for the staff to answer carefully in open session about some of those matters. Director Watson.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'll have a go at that question. The form of the agreement going forward is now no longer intended to be a lease, though that is not necessarily an issue with which council has turned its mind or agreed. And the term of that lease, or whatever it takes, in the case of, again, I referred to the Linfield Village Green earlier, was substantially greater than the term being talked about in this report. When the statement of intent, I think it was signed by council earlier last year in relation to this project, at that point in time, the one concern that councillors had was 20-year term, and I recall by a number of parties asked to push back on that extremely heavily, and that position has never changed in our negotiations to this date.
Thank you.
And just to reiterate that point for everybody, obviously with a heads of agreement coming in on the 3rd of February that had some new clauses in it, this written report is dealing with the former heads of agreement. So there's something there that needs to be borne in mind, that this report can only go so far because it's not dealing with the current draft heads of agreement before the staff. Councillor Kay.
Okay, through you, Madam Mayor, to Director Watson. Just in relation to the heads of agreement, how many versions have we had going backward and forward? I mean, you've mentioned 3. How many are there previous over the time frame?
Director Watson.
Going to take that on notice, Madam Mayor.
Thank you.
I've got another question.
Yes, please go ahead. Councillor Kay, you have the floor.
This is to Director Watson. Without going into detail, because I know we can't with the heads of agreement, is clause 6.7 one of the concerns? I don't know if you have that in front of you, but I'm happy to.
Yes. Director
Obviously,
Watson.
I can't go into the detail, but
We can't mention what's in clause 6.7.
6.7, Madam Mayor, is a new clause that appeared between the mid-January draft of the HOA and the first week of February, 3rd of February HOA. It covers matters that have never, in more than 2 years of discussions with the Department of Education, been raised before. As I alluded to in the briefing, no, I can't go any further than that, Madam Mayor.
Understand, but councillors, if you want more specific details, we can certainly move into confidential now or at a later stage. But Councillor Shadow is next to speak.
Madam Mayor, I believe we've had 2 speakers for and 2 against.
The General Manager will just confirm that.
Madam Mayor and Councillors, we have speaking for the amendment were Councillors Clark, Shadow and Smith, and against were Councillors 9K.
We have indeed. Councillor Shadow, are you wishing to move that the motion be put?
Move that the motion be put.
Which is the amendment before us. I will put that motion to the floor that the amendment be put. We're not voting on the amendment, we're voting that it be put now and that debate on it cease. So those in favour of that motion being put now. That is unanimous. Councillor... No. Okay. We're just checking the new procedures now. Councillor Kay, I'm going to put you on the spot because of the new processes. We're voting now on the amendment, which isn't your motion, but you have the right to sum up now.
Sorry.
Our microphone needs to go on.
Sorry. Okay. All right. Well, I'll just go through what I have here. I did actually have a sum up. Okay. So Council has obtained a loan in the financial capacity to go ahead with the project. The Department of Local Government has stated in writing that there's no objections to Council proceeding with the project. EPM are the leading experts. So we have the pathway, the ESEP. No one has more experience. We've been listed with that supplier. Council risks losing the 3.5 million grant as the milestones of funding agreements, if they're not met. The number of forecourts is critical, and there is substantial cost savings by splitting the cost of building stages 1 and 2 to Council will create a much higher future cost for the ratepayer and the loss of the New South Wales Government grant, which is a concern. If we do not proceed this evening, it is more than likely an indoor sports facility will not be built in our area anytime in the near future. I was elected to represent the community. This is something they both want and need, and is to be utilised by many future generations. Let's make this happen.
Thank you. So that's the sum up complete, but we are not putting the motion, Councillor Kay's motion, we are putting the amendment, which is Councillor Clark's amendment of the officer's recommendation as printed in the business papers. I will put that amendment now. All those in favour? That is Councillors Clark, Greenfield, Chatto, Smith, Anderson. Against, Councillors Nye, Pettit, Spencer, Kay. That is carried. That becomes the motion. Now I put the motion. All those in favour? That is Councillors Clark, Greenfield, Chatto, Smith, Anderson. Against, Councillors Nye, Pettit, Spencer, Kay. That is carried. Councillors, we move from general business to extra reports circulated to the meeting. No, it's not in M1. Extra reports circulated to the meeting. General Manager. There are none. We now move to motions of which due notice has been given, which is NM1, proposed synthetic surface at Norman Griffiths, West Pymble, and that was withdrawn by Councillor Clark. I need a motion, please. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I'd like to start off by thanking, of course, my learned colleague for collaborating on this slight amendment. So I'd like to move the original motion with an amendment. That is point AI or A1. Instead of A1, that is to be deleted and to be replaced with the following. And I'll also bring it over once I read it out for you. For staff to provide...
I'm sorry, may I ask that the... yes, thank you.
Yep. So AI is to be deleted and replaced with the following. For staff to provide high-level costings to build the field in a manner that handles either a 1% or a 2% flood event. And I'll bring that over for you, just to make it a bit clear.
Is that the only change, Councillor? All right. Councillor Clark is just taking that over to go up on the screen. We'll just wait for it to go on the screen. Thank you. That's the only change, and that has been made. Is there a seconder for that? Seconded, Councillor Smith. Right. Oh, and it's just being brought back to the table. So that is moved and seconded. Do you wish to speak to it?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll speak very briefly. I think we all can accept that sport provision in our local area is incredibly important. We know we have to have a 40% increase in sports fields provisions by 2036. I think that we need to be looking at ways we can handle this sports fields provision. I think it's also important, however, to understand the financial implications upon council. We have projects totaling tens of millions of dollars on council's long-term financial plan, currently unpaid for. We have asset renewal infrastructure backlogs that we have to be dealing with. So I think it's important when we look at building new areas and new fields, especially if we're going to be managing quite serious flood events, what's the cost of this going to be? So that's why I'm comfortable putting this motion forward. And of course, I thank Councillors Spencer and Pettit for their work in developing this motion, which we're now putting forward. So I commit the motion to the floor.
Thank you. And as seconder, Councillor Smith, do you wish to speak to this?
No, Madam Mayor. I think Councillor Clark has summed it up.
Thank you. Councillor Spencer, do you wish to speak to it?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm truly happy that my fellow councillors, Clark has moved this motion and Smith has seconded this. It is really exciting that we have an opportunity to conduct a study in this location for a artificial pitch. And recently we received several references from, from Scout, West Pymble Scout, and I believe everyone received this as well. Should
Yes.
I carry on?
Yes, you may carry on.
I was just saying that it was sent to all councillors and so on, the references. I just have to, briefly name them. West Pymble Scout Group, West Pymble Bicentennial Club, and then we have St. Matthew's Anglican Church, and Our Lady of Perpetual Succor, Rugby Club, and let's see, I think that's it. That's quite a lot, actually. It's Ku-ring-gai, primary school sports, and so on. So I'm really thankful that some of the other councillors can come on board, and I'm looking forward to see at least a study being done and something that we can look forward to in the near future. Thank you.
Councillor Shadow, you have your light on?
Yes, I do, Madam Mayor. Just a couple of questions through you to, now who would it be? Would it be Director Watson? You're in the hot seat tonight, Director Watson.
Man of the moment.
Just a matter of cost, how much is this likely to cost and about how long will it take to do? Through you, Madam Mayor, to Director Watson.
Through you, Madam Mayor. As far as I can recall, all of the work that is required to answer this motion in relation to the 2% event has already been prepared. So all we need to do is what was in the original motion, which is the 1% event. I had a rough cost put on that at about $12,500. It's not very much modelling, and it may be that the matter can come back to Council in April.
Good, thank you very much.
If there are no, there are. Another speaker, Councillor Pettit.
Super. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, it's certainly a project, I think, which is going to benefit the wider community. Councillor Spencer has gone through the various sporting groups and community groups which will benefit from it. It's not just a one sport location. We have multiple sports. We have the bowling club there, which will thrive, even more so than it is now. We have the pool right next door to it. It will be a sporting hub, a sporting precinct. It will be a place for people to meet, greet, gather, to have functions there. This field will allow usage right throughout the year, and it will be a quality field. It won't be just the dirt track that currently the football club have to endure once the rain hits. They will be able to provide first-class facilities. It will actually attract more people and more players to the club, and it's good to see it happening. It's one of those things that, as we mentioned at previous council meetings with Nesrock, where we need to get greater utilisation of our sporting fields and provide more options. And I've heard Councillor Clark and Madam Mayor mention those shortfalls, and it's good to see that Councillor Clark's on board and we work collaboratively with just tweaking this notice of motion. So I think the wider community will be very happy to see things progressing here. Thank you.
Well, I would add a small word of caution in that regard. We're asking for a report and more work to come back to us about costs and feasibilities and flooding, so it's rather a strong leap to say this facility is going to be able to be achieved, but it will be a step towards clarifying the issues surrounding this location. If there are no further speakers on this, I'll ask Councillor Clark as mover to sum up.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll reserve my right to sum up.
No, it means no. There's no sum up.
Yes, of course. No sum up.
This is the very end. Now is the time for councillors to show their support or otherwise for this notice of motion. I will put it as it has been moved by Councillor Clark with that one small amendment. All those in favour? That is unanimous. That is carried. Councillors, we move to business without notice. None. We move to questions with notice, and as you will notice, there is none in the business papers, so we don't have anything to deal with there. There are no inspections prepared. The General Manager has passed to me to announce that a notice of rescission has been received on GB 16, the New South Wales Department of Education Joint Use Proposal, St Ives High School Indoor Sports Centre, signed by Councillors Spencer, Pettit, Kelly and Kay, and this means that there can be no progress on this matter until it comes back before Council again in a month. And there's another rescission as well, a second one on the site-specific development control plan to support planning proposal for 45 to 47 Tennyson Avenue and 105 Eastern Road, Turramurra. It's a rescission signed by Councillors Spencer, Pettit and Kay. And again, because both those rescissions were lodged before the end of the council meeting, no action can be taken on those matters until it comes back to council at the next meeting. There being no further business, I declare the meeting closed at 8:39 p.m.